Okay, shepherd, we're listening, aren't we? But not always hearing. You ever wonder where God's voice is? Wonder how come He's not leaving you any voice messages and even a text message? I'd settle for that. We do hear voices, strangers' voices sometimes. You know, it's those voices that say, that lead us to hate or to fear, be afraid. The voices that lead us to selfishness, anxiety. Those are the strangers' voices that Jesus wants us to ignore, to do our best to ignore. One way that the shepherd speaks to us is through our mothers' voices. Maybe not for all of us and maybe not always, but most of us have had the opportunity to hear the shepherd's voice through our mothers or a mother figure in our lives. I hear my mother's voice saying, as we're walking out the door as kids, "Go easy, be careful." My mother's voice so often has said, "Be kind." What does your mother's voice say? Do you hear your mother's voice ever? Mothers, like the shepherd in Psalm 23, lead us and guide us with advice, with example. They comfort us. They anoint us with oil, spread the table before us. Literally, a lot of mothers for us spread that table before us. John Paul and I have a good memory of one time when we were visiting my parents, and it was late at night. Had we just arrived or what? Yeah, and my mother just starts pulling out all this food, and what could we do but be good sons and eat? So there's also just the mother's tone of voice. I was reading a little bit this past week about how, something we all know, but about how babies, there's been plenty of studies done about how babies recognize their mother's voice and favor their mother's voice, not necessarily over their father's, but over strangers, and even as people get older, like there was a study of middle-aged students, if they got a chance to talk to the mothers on the phone before, I forget what the task was, they were so much more relaxed and comfortable. I think it was exams or something like that. Maybe that's a good study method. And our mother's actions, we hear the shepherd's voice simply through the many ways in which our mothers, even without saying anything, have shown us God's love through their sacrifice. We've been reflecting on the Pope's book, Joy of the Gospel. Today is another installment of that at 2 o'clock in Roeder Hall. Everyone's invited. And one thing that we're going to talk about today is Pope Francis's encouragement to practice Lectio Divina, which means divine reading, which is a very traditional way of praying with the Scriptures, reading the Scriptures in a prayerful way, chewing over the Scriptures, allowing God to speak to us personally. How does this make a difference in my life? It's not always an immediate response we get to certain scripture passages, and so it takes time and leisure to do that, a peaceful heart. And certainly one thing we read about, what we celebrate this season, in what we read about in Scripture, is that the shepherd laid his life down for us, That's how much the shepherd loves us. The shepherd poured out his life for us. The shepherd was willing to die out of love and rose again and brings us with him to the resurrected life, fullness of life. So there's Scripture, and there's our mothers, and there's also that quiet that, I always like to talk about. In the quiet, we can hear the shepherd's voice. Many students, especially students getting ready to graduate, are thinking about next year, what God calls you to do with your life. And that question in many ways doesn't stop no matter how old we get. Always asking God, what do you call me to do? The word we have for this calling literally is vocation. It means a calling. And there again, wouldn't it be nice to just get a voicemail with the plan for our lives? But I read something really nice this week saying, but it's rich, isn't it, how because God doesn't do that with us, at least not with most of us, then we're challenged then. We have the opportunity to explore, to tease out in our lives what our gifts are, what the needs are in the world, and what our desires are, and how all of those things meet in some place. And maybe we think we figured it out and then decide, okay, I need to go to this graduate school, I need to take this job, and then a year later, 5 years later, 20 years later, we find ourselves asking that again because it didn't work out, or the job is through, or there's no work in our field. And doesn't mean we didn't listen well before, but God is always calling us anew. Where do our deepest desires and passions and gifts meet the world's needs today? In that quiet, we hear our vocation. In that quiet, we can hear Jesus' invitation to that abundant life. In the quiet, in a place that's deeper than feelings even, because we want so badly to feel God's voice, God's love, but don't always. But that's okay, because deeper still, there is the shepherd's voice, always saying, don't be afraid. I'm with you. I love you. Don't be afraid. I am with you. I love you. Don't be afraid. I am with you. I love you.